these are very serious accusations. It does field a lot of these. It does have a duty of care to its staff. It cannot just be a knee-jerk organisation to any allegation. And I think it has to try and navigate a path between those two things.
Outside Broadcasting House this morning, TV reporters have assembled to cover the latest scandal to hit the BBC. Of course, one of them is from the BBC itself, with the job of reporting on the bosses inside. Lizo Mzimba got the short straw this morning. Here he is an hour ago telling viewers the latest.
Today's front page of The Sun claims that the unnamed presenter made 2 panicked phone calls to the young individual in question, saying, "What have you done?" and asking them to ring their mother to get them to stop the investigation. The BBC hasn't been able to independently verify those claims, but The Sun also says that the family of the young individual is upset by the BBC's statements and claims no one from the corporation rang them for a proper interview after the initial complaint.
Well, for a slightly less tense explanation of what's going on, let's speak to Alex Farber, who's the Times' media correspondent. Morning to you, Alex.
Morning, Asma.
Now, the basic allegation against the BBC is that it's acted too slowly and inadequately, something it's been accused of in the past. Can you just take us through the timeline of all of this from May until today?
Yeah, sure. So May 19th, the BBC was contacted by the family of the victim who made some allegations. Now, at this point, the BBC, it says, and according to my sources, leapt into action with a view to trying to substantiate these. It receives a lot of allegations about its high-profile stars, and it has a team that's dedicated to investigating them. So it tasked that team with looking into these allegations. My understanding is, as part of its inquiries, it made efforts to contact the complainant, which were unsuccessful. And it was ultimately unable to substantiate the claims that had come in. We then spool forwards to last week, when it's contacted by a journalist from The Sun. My understanding is that was on the Thursday, ahead of the story being published on the Saturday, late on the Friday night. At that point, it then had more evidence with which to act based on the evidence that was in The Sun's report, and put in place a process which ultimately led to the suspension of the individual.
So they didn't have the evidence. BBC didn't have the evidence. They had to rely on what was in The Sun.
Yeah, that's certainly the claim, and I think a lot of this will hinge on the extent to which the BBC seriously investigated these claims. Who did it approach? How seriously did it try and approach them? We've had reports out overnight that the family doesn't feel like it was communicated with adequately, that it didn't make sufficient attempts to communicate with it and elicit more information. Now, inquiries around this are inevitable, and in the fullness of time, I'm sure we will know what the process looked like, how well the BBC dealt with it, and whether there was any more that it could have done prior to it being contacted by The Sun with the whole sorry saga.
Now, the debate right now, one of the strands of the debate, of course, is whether this person, this presenter, should be named. Obviously, the argument for not naming them is to do with allegations like this can ruin people's lives, careers, etc., especially if they turn out not to be true. Innocent until proven guilty, as many people are getting in touch with us and saying. The flip side of that, of course, in these kind of cases is that it becomes in the public interest, because if this person is guilty of what is being alleged and there are other alleged victims, then those victims are then emboldened to come forward.
Yeah, and look, what we're hearing again overnight is that victims are coming forwards, despite the fact that the individual hasn't been named. That people, one of the challenges in this is that the Sun's report references a high-profile, highly paid BBC presenter, of which there aren't that many. So the potential pool of initial individuals that it might be is incredibly small. And then what we then got into a situation yesterday was many of those potential people that it might have been started ruling themselves out and saying, this isn't me. So immediately that pool starts shrinking. So that has to be counterweighed with the fact that, you know, there are questions about whether they should be named or not. It feels like it's only a matter of time until the identity of the individual it does come out, really.
And the process that now unfolds, already there are some complaints about, you know, how quickly or not the BBC has acted. These kind of things, we know, these kind of scandals can bring down people, deputy heads, and indeed heads occasionally roll. Do you get any sense of whether the BBC has actually, I mean, obviously we had the Jimmy Savile thing, and then an ITV, we had the Philip Schofield thing very, very recently. Is there a sense that the BBC has, I don't know, has those in its mind, that it understands that, yes, it's a big organisation, and yes, these are very delicate allegations, but it has to be seen to act quickly?
There's definitely a perception issue here, and a lot of this not only is to do with the thoroughness of any investigations that took place and how comprehensive they were, but also in the way in which it responded to revelations and events as they unfolded. Now, my understanding is that the BBC considers that it has acted quickly since it was alerted to the fullness of the allegations, and really could not have done much more in the time available to it. You know, other people skeptical and are saying, you know, it's moved much more quickly to suspend individuals in other circumstances. They've pointed to Gary Lineker and to Clive Myrie as a very smaller, less important issue. But nevertheless, when the BBC feels compelled to act, it does. Now, whether receiving a serious complaint about an individual very late on a Thursday evening, moving to a suspension on a Sunday morning constitutes pace or not will vary according to who you ask. But you know, that in the backdrop, you have to be aware that these are very serious accusations. It does field a lot of these. It does have a duty of care to its staff. It cannot just be a knee-jerk organisation to any allegation, and I think it has to try and navigate a path between those two things.
Alex, thank you very much for this. Alex Farber, the Times' media correspondent, as I said, a really large article on this in the Times today, including some analysis, really interesting analysis by Alex, so make sure you read that.